10:28 p.m., December 23rd, 1983. The residents of northern Alaska experienced a rumbling powerful enough to shatter windows and shake foundations. It was coming from the far side of the mountains, somewhere deep in the untamed Arctic expanse. An earthquake? Or had the first thrust of nuclear war with Russia been dropped, paradoxically, in the far-off reaches of America's most isolated state? Either explanation would have been preferable to the truth. It took the government more than 24 hours to issue a response to the unfolding cataclysm. On Christmas morning, many families turned on their televisions and were greeted by the violent red glow of an emergency broadcast. That broadcast failed to reach Alaska's most remote populace, robbed of their electricity by the same catastrophic force that was still shaking the ground. They were first alerted to the disaster's true magnitude by the inferno that crept over the mountain. Families watched their homes burn as planes flew low overhead, releasing something above the pristine white landscape. The snowfall was joined by drifting soot, then by the flutter of thousands of slips of paper. Government issued evacuation flyers that confirmed the situation was much, much worse than anyone could believe or comprehend. That day, the day of the Great North Alaskan Disaster, was the last time any human would dare to make a home of the Alaskan wilderness. I'm Mudgeon, and today I want to introduce you to the horrific world of Arcadia, an analog horror series created by Chilling Abyss. Across its current run of 11 episodes, it weaves a story that feels fresh yet familiar, but only if you're able to put the pieces together in a way that makes sense. Today, I plan to do just that. I'll walk you through all 12 tapes, covering every episode in detail, and pointing out all the connections you might have missed. Finally, I'll give you my theories about the story and where it might go from here. I firmly believe that this is the most underrated analog horror project on YouTube right now, so please, before continuing, go support the original creator by watching the series on their channel and subscribing using the link in the description. Before we go further, I wanted to let you know that as of right now, the Mudgeon Makeship campaign is live. I've purchased quite a few plushies through Makeship now, and I've always been impressed with the build quality they deliver, so it's super encouraging to see how well Mudgeon turned out. I think the thing that impresses me the most about it is just how well they did like the eye on the side. Like the fact that you can actually see it from the front and it's got this nice like asymmetry to it is it's so goofy looking, and I love it. So if you'd like to get your own adorable abomination, this dude's only gonna be available through Makeship for the next 3 weeks. So go ahead and pick one up fast. And with that, let's get back into chapter 1 of Arcadia. Allow me to open the door to paradise. Welcome to Arcadia. The first tape is, 9:58 p.m. It looks like we're tuning in just in time for a new block of programming. Tape 1 of Arcadia, Deep Sea Live, is the premiere that seeks to bring you and your family down to the murky depths of the ocean, all through the gateway of your tube TV. A live video feed from the bottom of the ocean is quite the experience for a small South Alaskan town, and it's starting at the perfect time. Just as folks are setting in for the night, they're treated to some peaceful aquatic ambience to help them relax. Two companies, Deep Blue Foundation and Spectrum Innovations, built a submersible equipped with state-of-the-art video technology, all so they could observe a giant crevice on the ocean floor, lovingly referred to as the Pit. The Pit is just like any other hole, except it's much holier than the rest. By that, I mean it seems to go on forever, or at least it goes down further than any of our current instruments can measure. There's just one problem. After you've sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars into a highly advanced submersible vehicle, there's very little left over to afford radio control technology, so Deep Blue and Spectrum opted to just throw some dude into their submarine and get him to operate everything. So, shortly before 10 p.m., they lowered the vessel and its occupant down to the edge of the abyss to observe the pit and to share their findings with the folks back home. Then, at 10 p.m. on the dot, the camera came to life, and right there it was. The seafloor was dark, as one might have expected, but directly in front of the sub was an expanse of darkness within the darkness. The submarine lights offered up a few meager photons to illuminate the area around the vehicle, but its lights were completely swallowed up by the pit. After a few moments, the operator activated yet another innovative device, a hydrophone, capable of introducing underwater audio to the broadcast. Before long, it picked up a series of deep, distant groanings. The operator typed out a message on screen: whales. Several minutes later, a strange abyssal entity swam past. Dragonfish. A unique sight, but nothing unexpected. Then came another sound. Another whale call? No, the operator would have recognized a whale call, but this new sound completely evaded recognition. It might have been produced by shifting tectonic plates, but what if it wasn't? The possibility of observing some never-before-seen organism live on the air was endlessly exciting. The operator wrote out another message. Unknown. At 10:43 p.m., something appeared in the darkness above the pit. It was too far away for a proper identification, so the operator continued to play into the mysterious nature of the depths. Another message was given to introduce the pair of glowing eyes hovering over the pit. No words, just a single question mark. 10:54 p.m. Something is trying to get in. The sound of teeth, or some equally hard material, clangs against the hull of the submersible. The clattering continues until finally, the clock, the camera, the hydrophone, and the lights all simultaneously go dead. Viewers across Alaska were suddenly bathed in darkness as their TV screens went completely black. All that was visible were the messages being hastily typed out by the operator. System malfunction. Light and sound gone. Attempting system reboot. Then the messages became more frantic. Desperate. Recall the sub now, followed by, please help me. One final message. It's hard to know the intention behind the operator's final message. Was it the hopeless prayer of a man who knows he's about to die, or an identification of his killer? Either way, his fate was not considered appropriate for further broadcasting, which is incredibly strange considering the contents of Tape 2. See, Tape 2 is yet another broadcast from the same TV station, Arcadia TV. In fact, the first 4 tapes of this series are all recordings of programs that aired on Arcadia TV. This entry is an episode from a short TV show, Midnight Safety Guide. This episode, the 4th entry in the series, is about mythical creatures. That sounds goofy at first, but based on the warning at the beginning and the overall tone of the episode, it seems like this is actually a children's show made to educate kids on the strangest dangers of the world. The episode begins with a warning. While you may have been told by your parents that monsters aren't real, the truth is they do exist and can cause harm. If you or someone you know has recently come into contact with an unusual entity, please notify your local authorities immediately. So basically, the monster under your bed is real, and your parents are lying to you. Heavy stuff for a school night. The warning fades away, and the episode continues. In recent years, a growing number of anomalous entities have been documented. Mythical creatures are among the more recent entries to the list. It seems like these creatures can vary radically from one another. Their size, shape, and overall proportions lack any regularity, but there are a few constants across their kind. For one, despite their broad physical variations, they all share a vaguely humanoid appearance. By this, I assume the episode simply means that mythical creatures generally have 1 head, 2 arms, and 2 legs. They aren't human enough to steal your identity or something like that. More importantly, they all share a common behavior, or maybe it's more accurate to say they all play by the same rules. Interactions with mythical creatures are dangerous, extremely so, but as far as supernatural threats go, they're actually somewhat predictable. The most important thing to keep in mind is that if you don't acknowledge the creature, it cannot harm you. In fact, it won't even know you're there. They only become a threat once you interact or engage with them in some way, so their first line of attack is usually to try to trick you into recognizing their presence. They come at night, when your mind is tired and your willpower is at its weakest. Most commonly, they'll try to get your attention by staying hidden and making sounds. They might shuffle around, knock on doors, or even whisper from the darkness, but under no circumstances should you respond. Even a simple questioning, "Hello?" or a cry for help is enough for the creature to become aware of your identity, and then the rules change entirely. Once they know who you are and where you are, they will offer you something desirable. The episode isn't totally clear about what sort of things they might offer or how the value of the object is determined. Do they offer you something that you would find personally valuable, or do they offer things that most humans would find valuable? I wouldn't be surprised to learn if each offer is unique to the prey. I don't really have answers to these questions, but I'd be eager to learn more about what these creatures are capable of, especially considering what comes next. Once the offer has been made, you have a simple choice: accept or decline. Rest assured, the correct choice is to decline the offer, no matter what it is. We aren't told what happens if you accept, which is honestly worse than if they just told us the consequences outright, but we learn that the creatures don't take rejection very well. If you refuse the offer, the creature will become progressively more hostile, but it will also begin to slowly fade from reality. How slowly, you might ask? According to the episode, if you manage to survive for 30 days, the creature will vanish. 30 days. You have to survive being hunted by this thing for an entire month before you're safe again? I don't know about you, but to me, those don't really seem like winning odds, especially when the only actionable advice for survival we're given is try to ignore them. The program isn't too optimistic about your survival either. It continues and mentions that out of all the documented encounters with a mythical creature, only 3 instances have been recorded in which someone rejected the creature's offer and survived the full 30 days. Remember, those are the stats for making the right choice. So, maybe think twice before answering that knock on your door late into the night. If you do answer, you need to be absolutely sure that the person at the door is someone you know. But hey, you look pretty capable, so let's assume you survive the pursuit. As the creature fades away, it will leave behind a strange marking, some sort of pictograph, unlike the hieroglyphics from any human culture. This is the creature's name. I don't know how the creators of Midnight Safety Guide know that, and they refuse to elaborate because that's where the tape ends. Sort of. See, I may have edited the tape just a little bit. I wanted to make sure that you had a full understanding of these creatures before diving into... Look, this tape has passed through a lot of hands, and at some point, it seems like someone added something to it. Found footage of an encounter between a mythical creature and a child. I'll let you place your bets whether or not this is one of the 3 survivors I mentioned earlier.
Hello? Is there somebody there? Can you hear me?
The moment the girl responded to the knock at the door, it spelled her doom. That one act, so seemingly innocuous, had much greater consequences than the girl on the tape ever could have foreseen. A supremely malevolent force invited in entirely by accident. In Arcadia, the stakes are high and the margin for error is very, very low. Anyway, while the episode itself is concerning enough, I want to zoom out just a little bit to ask 3 big picture questions. Firstly, what sort of world do you have to be living in for there to be a need for this sort of programming? I mean, we've got dangers in our world too. There are all the screwy and more than a little disturbing PSAs produced throughout the 80s and 90s. But there weren't just like entire TV shows dedicated to teaching kids how to avoid bears or something like that. That's not to mention the fact that, secondly, this isn't the only episode of the show. It's episode 4. It started out by saying, in recent years, a growing number of anomalous entities have been documented. Mythical creatures are among the more recent entries to the list. To me, this is way more disconcerting than the content of the episode itself. You're telling me that this world is inhabited by immaterial fairy demons, and that's not even episode 1 material. There were 3 other things that the producers felt were more urgent to warn people about. I think we might be screwed. Okay, the final question I have is this, and you may already be asking it yourself. How on earth does this relate back to the first episode? I mean, there's no obvious connection between Earthworm Jim over here and the fish monster we saw in Deep Sea Live. Was that monster supposed to be a mythical creature? It sure didn't seem very humanoid to me, but I guess we didn't get a great look at it. Either way, I don't think we're going to find many answers from scouring the first 2 episodes. On to the next tape. Arcadia Apology is a short one, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. This episode is basically a recorded apology for the Deep Sea Live broadcast. Arcadia TV acknowledges that the broadcast was distressing for families who were looking forward to a quiet night on the couch. The most relevant piece of info we get is that the station blames the incident on the actions of a rogue employee and calls it all a prank. Keep in mind that throughout the entire apology, they never actually say that the broadcast was faked. It seems like even if you weren't supposed to see it, they're not challenging the authenticity of the footage. Arcadia TV ends the apology by confirming that the employee has been terminated and assures viewers that this won't happen again. However, before the next broadcast begins, the screen distorts and we see a final message. This is just the beginning. Maybe the employee isn't quite so terminated after all. The next tape, the final entry in our series of anomalous broadcasts, is called The Crying Cave. It begins with a shot of a sprawling golden field, an Arcadian sight if ever I've seen one, before a seemingly insignificant portion of the screen is highlighted. Then, well, he's having fun. The video cuts and we get a bit of text. A body was found near an undisclosed location on July 19th. My gut feeling is that it's probably the same guy we just saw pulling a DB Cooper a few moments ago. The body was found near 2 other objects, a missing persons poster and a video camera. The poster shows 3 missing children, Sarah Brown, Daniel Smith, and Jack Miller, each of whom were reported to have gone missing near Crying Cave on July 19th, year unknown. Oddly enough, the 3 of them had never been reported missing, and the reason why became clear when authorities started to track down the children. The first 2 kids, Sarah and Daniel, were found safe at home with their families. Jack Miller, on the other hand, was never found. But see, that's the weird thing about it. He never went missing either. Jack Miller doesn't exist. So what, is this some sort of prank? Maybe a bizarre art project? Unfortunately, the only person who might have answered that question had to be peeled up out of the dirt, and I doubt his corpse was too eager to participate in the investigation. But don't forget, the poster wasn't the only thing they found near the body. Looks like Icarus immortalized his final moments on video cassette, giving us our first solid tick on the timeline, July 19th, 1988. Seems like the poor guy decided to do some late-night spelunking, missing poster and video camera in hand. Based on the poster, I'd say this is the Crying Cave we're seeing the guts of. The recording on the tape starts at 9:34 p.m., and to his credit, the person filming makes pretty good progress through the cave. Unfortunately for him, something else already made its way even deeper into the labyrinth. About 20 minutes later, at 9:53 p.m., he stumbles across something that, if you've been paying attention, should look eerily familiar. Two glowing eyes, watching him from deep in the darkness, only, this time, our cameraman isn't protected by several inches of steel. A low growl hit the hard stone walls, amplified by the natural acoustics of the cave. It seemed to be coming from everywhere, all at once. Once again, to the credit of our cameraman, he wastes no time watching it. There was no thrill of discovery or sense of scientific wonder, just fear. He raced back the way he came, but every tunnel looked the same. The cold, damp cave walls formed a maze, and terror erased the possibility of finding the entrance. The odd, echoing call of the beast filled every chamber with pure, directionless noise. It would take a miracle to get the cameraman out of the cave, and then a miracle happened. 9:59 p.m., just ahead, burrowed directly into the floor, is a giant pit. It's hard to tell from the video, but it seems to be about 15 feet across, much too far to jump. What's worse, it's impossible to tell how deep the pit is, but not because of the darkness of the cave. In fact, that's the most perplexing thing about the pit. See, somehow, despite it being on the brink of midnight in the depths of a cave, the pit is emitting a golden glow, almost like sunlight. The person filming leans out over the pit, trying to decide if it's safe to jump. At the bottom of the pit, if you can call it that, the light is blindingly bright. Falling that far would kill anyone, plain and simple. You'd have to be an idiot to jump in, and our cameraman isn't an idiot. Unfortunately, the cave itself makes the choice for him. The rock around the edge of the pit crumbles. Cameraman, camera, and wanted poster all topple into the pit. The light at the bottom rushed up to meet them. Stale cavern air whipped all around. Then the trio hit the light, and the air vanished entirely. But the falling continued. Or maybe not falling. Falling implied direction, but this place somehow evaded directionality entirely. It was dark, far darker than the cave. That darkness had been the absence of light, but here, this was the antithesis of light. Somewhere that the brightest rays could never reach. The overflowing emptiness weighed in on the cameraman, pushing him faster and faster towards a down that didn't exist. No, he wasn't falling. More like changing. Leaving. It all returned in an instant. Falling once more, air once more, light once more. Until there was nothing once more. And that was how it stayed. Forever. The episode ends where it began, with the same shot of the unidentifiable cameraman hurtling towards the idyllic Alaskan wilderness. Death in paradise. With what we can gather from the first 4 tapes, it's very hard to understand what's happening in this episode. My take on this entry is that the cameraman was searching Crying Cave for the missing children, either as a concerned friend or a prospective hero. That's why he went down into the caves just a few nights after the children were reported missing, according to the poster. Down in the cave, he encountered a monster very similar to the one from Deep Sea Live, as well as another bottomless pit. But now it's in a cave instead of at the bottom of the ocean? It doesn't make any sense. And as for the poster itself, maybe it's some sort of prank that went horribly wrong. After all, Sarah and Daniel were still safe at home. So far, the events of this series seem so, I don't know, scattered. Like, there's some sort of threat, clearly, but there's no consistency as to what it is or how it operates. Everything seems to lead to more questions rather than answers. But that all changes with Tape 5, The Signal. Before I get into Tape 5, go watch it for yourself. Seriously, I mean it this time. I need you to watch The Signal for yourself. This tape is where I realized that I had to talk about Arcadia because, honestly, this is one of the best episodes of analog horror to have ever been made. And it is criminally underrated. So please, go show Chilling Abyss some love and support for the masterpiece that is The Signal. The Signal comes out of Research Station Bravo, an Arctic lab located deep in North Alaska. The tape itself is a collection of video fragments recorded between 1980 and 1983 and recovered from the smoldering remains of the station. Before this story even gets started, we know it isn't going to end well. A notice at the beginning of the tape warns viewers that the tape doesn't present a full picture of what happened at Research Station Bravo. The timeline is broken, and large parts of the footage are damaged, if not missing entirely. But it's the best we've got. The notice vanishes, and we see a picture of an old man, a very important old man. Dr. John Walker is responsible for developing an incredible piece of technology, a machine capable of sending and receiving signals from outside our universe. Here's the idea. If there are parallel worlds out there, universes just like ours, then there are other John Walkers out there developing the same machine in their own worlds. So, whenever we send out a signal, the parallel universe should send one out at roughly the same time. If we're right, then we open the doors to collaboration with other universes. All their resources, their minds, their materials, their manpower, all pulled together for the common good in the first great interdimensional marriage between worlds. If we're wrong, that's no great loss, save for a few years of wasted research. There may be some differences from one world to another, but what marriage doesn't have some differences to work through? Some worlds may be more similar than others, sure, but there's a certain safety measure in place to make sure that doesn't become a problem. But we'll get to that in a second. Right now, it's time for the signal, the first signal to be sent out. February 3rd, 1980. The system boots up, displaying a short snippet of text. Copyright 1980, Atom Laboratories. Remember that name, Atom Labs. They're going to become tremendously important as the story progresses. With the system loaded up, it's time to run the program that will unite us with the other, Eve. The clock ticks on down, and the first signal is broadcast. Pay careful attention to this moment. This is the moment where we ask the question, are we alone? If not, where is everybody? Watch how the signal, our cry for companionship, extends out from our universe. And right on cue, a single reply issues back. Humanity's nearest companion. Hello world, they say, making the first move in the conversation. Communication with this other world is fast and exciting. We are not alone, and best of all, we seem to be deeply similar. After a few days of communication, we decide to move on to the safety measure that I mentioned before, the 3-image test. This test is designed to measure our similarity to other worlds by asking them to send images of 3 fundamental components of human life. First, we ask for them to send a picture of nature, then a picture of dog, and finally, themselves. We sent the request to these strange otherworldly people, and in response, here's what we received. It's all pretty normal, so upon seeing the results, we decided to give the other world our complete trust. The next step would be to establish a means of transportation between us and them. It was time to plan a wedding. But here's the thing about weddings. They take a lot of time and effort to plan, and a lot can go wrong. Atom Labs immediately got to work laying the foundation for the systems that would eventually close the immeasurable gap between universes. Production was slow, but steady, until almost 2 years later. November 26th, 1981, 3:31 a.m. Eve unexpectedly receives a signal from another universe, this one much further out than the first. If Parallel World 1 was our world's fated bride, this new suitor seems to be a distant, awkward admirer. Why did they wait until now to respond to the signal? Did it take that far to reach them? Or maybe they had a way of receiving it, but not a way to send anything back. Or maybe they were... Communication with this world is stilted and uncomfortable. Are you human? They ask us. They seem reluctant to answer our questions, but nonetheless, they seem interested in making a connection with us. The researchers at Atom Labs make yet another executive decision on behalf of humanity. They proceed to the 3-image test and decide to let the safety measure do its job. In response, we receive our first look at the strange, desolate world that they call home. These images freak me out so much. I mean, nature looks a bit decayed, but still, those seem like trees to me. I could believe that it really exists somewhere on Earth, even if it's somewhere that I don't ever want to visit myself. The dog, however, I can't tell apart the front or back of the creature. Does it have a front? What bothers me more, however, is that the odd animal-shaped lump looks almost dead. Like, we asked the inhabitants of this world to send us a picture of a dog, and their first thought was, oh, I guess we'll have to go kill one then. Of course, the worst of the three images is the final one, themselves. These blurred beings are unlike anything in our reality. Not quite alien, definitely not human, but thoroughly unknown. It goes without saying that these things, the other us, could not be trusted. And to think, they had the gall to ask us if we were human in our first interaction. Atom Labs immediately severed all connections to the stalker, but stalkers are not so easily shaken. Still, no sense focusing on the negatives. It was best to keep focused on the task at hand, forming a connection with Parallel World 1. December 23rd, 1983. That day should be familiar if you've been paying close attention. That was the day the machine was finally completed. That was the day we bridged the abyss. That was the day of the Great North Alaskan Disaster. The bridge slowly stretched between our world and Parallel World 1, and all proceeded as planned until our stalker showed themselves once more. Another bridge stretched out from the world we shunned, and it was too late to stop the connection. Arcadia is a story about doors and the consequences of opening them. This episode doesn't answer every question, but it gives us a lot of answers. So far, we've been seeing weird stuff happening across Alaska in the form of anomalous broadcasts. I'm willing to bet that all of the broadcasts we saw on Arcadia TV happened after the incident at Research Station Bravo. We tried to open the door for Parallel World 1, but now all the most malevolent worlds are leaking through into our reality. It's no wonder that the monsters we've seen so far seemed inconsistent and scattered. We can't figure out what the rules are because there are no rules. We've opened our doors to every evil imaginable. The first chapter of the series is called Welcome to Arcadia. I initially assumed it was called that because it's our introduction to the world, but this is when I realized we aren't the ones being welcomed. They are. The horrors that came to our door and stepped into our home. 3 years. It took 3 years to build the machine. And it only took 3 minutes for the world to end. It was our wedding day. And we burned the church down on top of ourselves. The next tape, Interference, picks up a few hours later. From what I can gather, the public story was that Station Bravo was studying nuclear energy. That's believable enough. I assume a giant machine capable of drilling interdimensional tunnels requires a lot of power, but obviously something went wrong on the night of December 23rd. Maybe a mishap with the machine caused one of the site's reactors to blow, or maybe the machine itself somehow caused the blast. Either way, one fact remains the same. At 10:25 on December 23rd, the lab was operating normally. At 6:30 a.m. the following morning, Research Station Bravo was gone. Literally, just wiped off the map entirely. Okay, maybe not entirely, but we'll get to that shortly. For now, a report is going live via a new station, KTNA7, to notify residents across northern Alaska about the fallout from the lab. But as the episode title suggests, something seems to be interfering with the broadcast. In place of the morning news, we see what appears to be a program created by Atom Labs. I wouldn't have guessed that they would be involved in media production, but anyway, all we really get to see of this program is the title card. Fear of the Unknown, The Forest. Copyright Atom Labs, 1980. Look, I'm gonna level with you. I have no idea how this applies to anything in the series that we have seen or will see. Like, I've got some theories, but they're real shot-in-the-dark type stuff, so I'll save it for the analysis section. Anyway, before we can gather any information about the content of the program, the broadcast cuts again to a cozy-looking video of a fireplace. Happy holidays, it says. That's nice. I'm sure that our Christmas Eve festivities won't be interrupted by any, foreboding transdimensional broadcast from worlds beyond our comprehension. The screen glitches again, and we see some of the earliest public reports regarding the Alaskan disaster. At first, all anyone really knew was that some sort of massive blast had occurred at the research station up north, but Atom Labs needed time to come up with an explanation for the blast. Right now, there was no official story, just a scattered collection of reports from residents across northern Alaska. The weird thing is, they weren't just reporting on the blast. A typical explosion might rattle some window panes, but this one was causing TVs to get freaky, and not in a fun way. People were seeing bizarre images on their screens. One person even claimed to hear God's voice speaking to them through their speakers. By far, the most common, however, were the reports of the face appearing in the static of the broadcast. Lucky for you, this particular tape we're watching just so happens to have a recording of that face, and the dire message it proclaimed. So, 2 things. First, I just want to say that this episode goes so hard. It is an unbelievably strong follow-up to The Signal, despite its relatively simple presentation. In fact, I think that the simple presentation of the episode works in its favor. Now, every single time I see a smiley face, I think of that line. This is not a warning. This is your death sentence. The contrast of the happy face paired with such a cold and cruel message is haunting, especially when paired with the phenomenal sound design of the series. But what does this episode mean for the story? It's important to point out that the first words of this broadcast, "Hello World," were also the first words we received from Parallel World 1 in the signal. Many viewers believe that the message in Interference is from Parallel World 1, and that their feigned friendliness was meant to trick us into opening the doors to our world. I can see how that might be the case. The contrast of the smiling face and the words we're hearing does smack of deceit, and the repetition of the phrase is definitely intentional. However, I don't think that Parallel World 1 is hostile, mainly because of how we contacted them to begin with. The signal wasn't meant to reach other worlds. It was meant to reach similar worlds. John Walker wanted to broadcast an interdimensional signal so that a world just like ours would do the same. Parallel World 1 responded to the signal promptly because they're the same as us, and they aren't hostile towards us because we aren't hostile towards them. It's the one and only world where we can look in the mirror and see our own face, undistorted. We share a unique naivety with Parallel World 1. We're both stumbling blindly in the dark, arms outstretched, desperate for companionship. Whoever the face in the static represents, they know something we don't, and they aren't eager to let us in on the secret. This is not a warning. This is your death sentence. They're content to sit back and watch us suffer, but why? If the other worlds are like us in some way, why wouldn't they help? Why are we so detested? Are they jealous of our non-gloopy dogs? Whatever the case may be, the most pressing issue is the immediate situation in the North, which leads me to the next episode, Emergency Broadcast System. Back in the intro, I mentioned families being greeted by a violent red glow from their TVs. Well, Tape 7 is a recording of the broadcast I was talking about. To summarize the broadcast, if you live north of Selawik, Alacaket, or Fort Yukon, you have 72 hours to evacuate your homes and head south. Avoid any unusual persons or objects that you may encounter. The evacuation is mandatory, and if you do not comply within the time frame, you will be considered hostile and may be shot. The broadcast ends with a 72-hour countdown. Things are bad. Time is short, and the government isn't playing games. They can't afford to. Tape 8, The Great North Alaskan Disaster, is a short, unreleased documentary created in 1990 by Arcadia Home Entertainment in collaboration with the state of Alaska. Like many of our other tapes, this one is plagued with glitches, distortions, and modifications, the first of which being this shot, another face in the static. Strangely enough, however, it's Dr. John Walker. Why would he be on the tape? I would have assumed that the crew at Research Station Bravo all got vaporized. Before we can consider his presence for long, the first section of the documentary begins. Part 1, The Catalyst. This part of the tape gives us some information about the events at the lab, and we see some very, very distant footage of the blast from inside the home of a North Alaskan resident. Like some sort of primitive PewDiePie, some kid was recording themselves playing a video game and just happened to catch the glow of fire over the mountain. While Research Station Bravo might be, inoperable, it turns out that the damage might not be as severe as we first thought. Don't get me wrong, the facility itself is toast. But in addition to the video fragments we saw in the signal, something else survived the initial blast. Or more accurately, someone else. Shortly after Bravo went up in smoke, a distress call was made by a researcher named Ian Parker.
Mayday, mayday, mayday! This is Research Station Bravo! Can anyone hear me? I repeat, this is Research Station Bravo! Can anyone hear me? This is... Can anyone fucking
Parker is definitely disoriented from the explosion, but it seems like he saw something in the ruins of the lab. Unfortunately, we only have audio, and without any video, it's hard to draw any solid conclusions. So, without any solid conclusions to draw, I'll give you my best guess. I think he saw something coming through the hole that Walker and his assistants had punched into reality. He saw the irreversible damage that Atom Labs had done. He saw the first door to our world, hanging off its hinges, never to be closed again. It's not clear what happened to Ian Parker after the call was made. He sounds pretty not okay, so I'm guessing that he's done so, but I'll try not to jump to conclusions. Anyway, this isn't a tape about Ian Parker. It's a tape about the Great North Alaskan Disaster. Part 2, Evacuation, retreads some information from Emergency Broadcasting System, but also gives some additional details regarding the effort to notify residents of the evacuation. In addition to the broadcast, I mentioned earlier that the government began dropping thousands of flyers across the region to reach those who were without power. That worked well, initially, but the effort was discontinued after 2 planes disappeared without completing their planned drop routes. Note the word choice there. Disappeared. This, combined with the interference that many residents reported, resulted in a failure to notify hundreds of Alaskans, most of whom would never be seen again. Part 2 ends with a copy of the official statement that was released before the evacuation was completed. Due to significant environmental hazards arising from an unforeseen event at a research facility in North Alaska, the region is now considered extremely dangerous. Entry to this region is now strictly prohibited for the foreseeable future. The tape then moves to what is, by far, the most informative section of this tape. Unfortunately, it also seems to be the most heavily modified. Part 3, The Wall. This part of the tape starts with a short, seemingly unrelated passage regarding the Great Animal Migration of '84 before returning to the matter at hand. The Wall is a giant concrete wall designed to split Alaska down the middle, dividing the north from the south and running along the Canadian border. I think the wall must have been finished in the year 1990, since that's the year shown at the beginning of this part, but it's hard to say due to the modifications to the tape. So, the state realized the threat posed in the north and decided to fix it by constructing a massive military-patrolled wall, a thoroughly American response. It's very hard to estimate how tall the wall is from the video, and I doubt we'll be getting metrics anytime soon. In fact, the image included in this video is one of very, very few that can be legally distributed. Without government approval, filming or photographing the wall is highly illegal. So, of course, the episode ends with what seems to be an unapproved video of the wall. A series of disquieting sounds comes from the other side. The camera distorts heavily, then goes black. It returns after a moment, this time with the camera pointed towards the moon and something hovering in the sky next to it. It's too far away to identify, unfortunately, but I doubt it's good. Notably, this shot is actually Chilling Abyss's profile picture, so I think that means it's important, but I really don't know why. Maybe he just thought it looked cool. Honestly, if you can avoid the wall entirely, it's probably for the best. After all, the wall protects us from the unknown. Speaking of the unknown, let's try to make it a little bit more known. Exclusion Zone Safety, the third to final tape so far, is filled with insider information. Out of every video in the series so far, this video honestly might be the most packed with answers. Of course, it's still an episode of Arcadia, so we also get plenty of new questions along the way. The episode starts with a recording of a password-protected computer screen. Once the password is entered, we see an incident report from October 3rd, 1989. The report contains scant details, but we can gather that a father and daughter from Alaskaket, Ethan and Chloe Marshall, experienced something traumatic. Whatever it was left Ethan severely injured, and Chloe, well, it didn't leave Chloe at all. In fact, ever since the incident, Chloe has been missing. Like I said, there aren't many details, which leads me to question why the file is even being accessed in the first place, and by who. The report disappears from the screen and we see another message. Data transfer complete. I guess the file was important enough to download, but I still can't see why. The tape then shifts towards the primary focus of this episode, an educational resource created by none other than Atom Laboratories titled Exclusion Zone Safety, Fissures. This is the third in a series of employee training tapes, but just like with the Midnight Safety Guide, we have no idea what the earlier episodes were about. I'm guessing that the exclusion zone is the area north of the wall, and I'm guessing that it's pretty hard to get the red clearance which is required to view this tape. You've got your red clearance on you, right? That's okay, me either. Wait, would they execute us if they found out we watched this? This program is designed to inform Atom Labs employees on the safety precautions to be taken when venturing through the exclusion zone. While there are many justifiable concerns for anyone traveling beyond the wall, this tape is focused entirely on a single threat: fissures. The resource begins by showing a map of northern Alaska, centered on the three northernmost habitable towns in the state: Sulliwik, Alacaquet, and Fort Yukon. The map changes to show data across several years, starting in 1987. At first, we see 9 white dots appear deep into the red area of the map, presumably the exclusion zone. By the end of 1988, the number of dots had more than doubled to 23. By June of 1989, I'm not counting all that. And the problem just gets exponentially worse by October. One thing I missed on my first watch through of this tape was the red dot that appears next to Alacaquet. The context would suggest that each of these data points is marking the location of a documented fissure. But what exactly does that mean? What is a fissure? The next portion of the presentation is dedicated to answering that exact question. Fissures are an extremely dangerous type of phenomenon that are supposed to be isolated within the exclusion zone. However, based on that red dot we saw outside of Alacaquet, maybe the exclusion zone isn't quite so exclusive after all. Essentially, fissures are what links our world to the unknown. They're the holes that connect this world to the next, and the next, and the next. In a word, they're doors. There are 2 types of fissures: unstable and stable. Unstable fissures are fleeting, lasting only a few milliseconds, but they're highly destructive, and they happen almost every single day. On the other hand, stable fissures can last anywhere from a couple of minutes to a few years, but they're rare. To date, only 15 have ever been reported, and supposedly only 4 of them remain active. The oldest fissure is located at Ground Zero, Research Station Bravo. The footage jumps from the presentation back to the database we saw at the start of the episode. Now, the incident report is gone, but someone's scrubbing through the list of employees from Station Bravo. The computer reports on the status of each researcher one by one, but they all seem to be missing. There are a couple of familiar names on the list, John Walker and Ian Parker, but before the computer can display the status of either of them, the tape once again returns to the presentation on fissures. The good thing about fissures is that they don't come entirely unexpectedly. There are always signs that warn of the impending disaster. The best way to avoid a fissure is to carry an electrostatic field detector, but assuming you left yours at home, there are still red flags that you can detect with your 6 senses. The first sign is an overwhelming sense of dread or fear. You won't be the only one who feels it. Even nearby insects and animals can sense the danger and will go silent. The next signs are more tangible. Your skin may tingle, your hair may stand on end, and you might hear a crackling in the air like lightning is about to strike. This sharp increase of electrostatic energy is a solid indicator that a fissure is about to open. Finally, you'll hear a strange sound coming from an unknown origin. Whispers from another world. If you've heard the whisper, you may be unable to avoid what's coming. Fissures are the doors to our world, but they don't creak open. No, they're kicked open violently. When a fissure appears, for an instant, one space overlaps with another. There's a flash of bright light, and the sudden increase in density causes a massive spike in air pressure, which expands rapidly as a sonic boom. In other words, every time a portal into our world opens, it's like a bomb going off. Anyone standing near the blast will experience traumatic injuries such as ruptured eardrums and broken bones, but they're the lucky ones. Anything within the fissure is immediately ejected from our universe, flung through the space between worlds, which Atom Labs calls the Abyss, and is replaced with something from the hateful worlds that haunt us. The items transported can range in size, shape, and material. Often, fissures will warp away small items like tapes or books. But in recent years, fissures have become increasingly likely to snatch up complex items like animals or, of course, people. Before the presentation can end properly, the screen distorts, and the final message of the presentation can only be seen for a few frames. Unstable fissures can transport humans, but most do not survive entry. The presentation ends with a warning. Never communicate with objects or entities that come through a fissure. Never enter a fissure. You will not return. Finally, the episode ends on the computer screen from the beginning. The data was correct. The area is expanding. Get everyone in the response program ready. Prepare to inform the public. Like I said, this episode answers many questions, but also leaves us with some new ones. We learned how the fissures inject anomalous entities and objects into our world. Based on what we know about fissures, I'm starting to think that the blast at Station Bravo, or Ground Zero as Atom Labs seems to be calling it now, wasn't related to nuclear power at all. Instead, it now seems clear that the blast was a result of the first fissure, which created a shockwave powerful enough to rattle North Alaskan homes for hundreds of miles. Ian Parker somehow managed to survive the blast at least long enough to see what came through the fissure and to comprehend some small fraction of the effect of John Walker's ambition. And whatever he saw horrified him. What's remarkable to me is that somehow, in the face of a disaster that they caused, Atom Labs managed to maintain access over what is now certainly the most important region on the face of the planet. The fact that Atom was allowed to continue their research beyond the wall, beyond military patrols, shows some pretty deep government ties and an astoundingly high degree of trust. But then again, I suppose the government doesn't really have a lot of choice in the matter. Atom Labs knows more than anyone else in our universe. My biggest concern is that Atom Labs still seems to know very little. Even within the tape, there's conflicting data. The employee education video states that fissures appear only in the exclusion zone, but we know from the map of reported fissures that at least one has been reported on this side of the wall. You might think that the red dot represents something other than a fissure, but let's return for a moment to the very beginning of this tape, to the incident report. The incident occurred in Alacaket in October of '89. So, the time frame and location both line up with the red dot on the map. Looking at the casualties, we see that Chloe Marshall went missing entirely, and that Ethan Marshall sustained injuries consistent with a massive impact. Injuries consistent with exposure to a fissure. Ethan and his daughter must have been caught in a fissure. He got lucky and, well, Chloe didn't. That's why someone's digging through these files, and that's why they downloaded the incident report. It's proof that the exclusion zone is expanding, and the discrepancy of data shows that Atom Labs is either lying or ignorant. But if that's why they're digging, I still have to ask, who's doing the digging? I thought it might have been Ethan Marshall, but I'm pretty sure this dude's out of commission. Good grief. But our initial view of the report left out one detail that appears for a split second during a glitch on the tape. An additional note that the researchers felt was important enough to jot down, and then later redact. Small traces of found in Father's system, similar to John Doe in '88. Wait, what? Who's this John Doe supposed to be, and what did they find in Ethan Marshall's system? This note is important, and I'll talk about it more in the analysis, but first, there are 2 more tapes left to get to. Tape 10 is short but important, kind of like me, except for the second part. This episode starts with an advertisement for a new game developed by Arcadia Software. The entire ad is just a shot of an empty field with a very slow zoom on the game case, and as far as I can tell, there's nothing spooky going on in the background. While the game appears to get closer and closer, several reviews flash across the screen. An enjoyable way to relax, says Cyber Reviews. Games Weekly calls it fun for the whole family, and Simply Good Games holds it up as an unforgettable experience. Finally, one unknown reviewer says, "It spoke to me." I assume this is meant to have a double meaning based on the usage of the word unknown throughout the rest of the series. Finally, we see the title of the game itself, The Farm, Welcome to Paradise. The warnings at the bottom of the screen are a bit concerning. Not responsible for serious injury or death. I kind of assumed most games weren't responsible for serious injury or death. Do they? Is this game gonna assault me or something? No, wait! With no further answers, the advertisement ends and we see some heavily distorted footage of a mountain range. At the bottom of the screen, a ribbon scrolls with the text, "Tunnels were found beneath the Alaska wall today," which is concerning for a variety of reasons. It's further confirmation that the exclusion zone is more of a suggestion than a rule, but it also sounds like something physical has managed to burrow its way under the wall. Before, all we had on this side was a single rogue fissure. Now, well, who knows what may enter. The distorted footage cuts, and we see another episode of the Midnight Safety Guide? That's unexpected. This time it's episode 3, and it seems to be covering a different anomalous entity known as Night Stalkers. Before we can learn anything about these creatures, however, the tape cuts once more, and it appears that, with the escalating situation in Alaska, the government has opted to enact a curfew between the hours of 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. Well, I call it a curfew. It honestly seems more like a mandatory lockdown. Lock your doors, stay inside, and grab a gun. During this time, all emergency services are unavailable, almost as if to say, we can't protect you or your family. Pray that you can protect yourselves. The curfew starts, and the episode ends. Really, this is one of those tapes that only holds more questions, so I won't waste too much time analyzing it. There's only one tape left. Then, we can dive into the timeline and analysis. Before we get into the last 2 episodes, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who's still watching. If you've enjoyed Arcadia so far, once again, I highly encourage you to go subscribe to Chilling Abyss and see where the story goes from here. If you've been enjoying the analysis, it'd mean a lot if you subscribed and stuck around for future videos. With that, let's get into tape 11, The Farm. The Farm is massive. To put into perspective just how big this episode is, so far, this single tape accounts for nearly a third of the runtime of the entire series. It spans the entire timeline, expands on everything we've learned so far, and unfortunately, it proves that our problems are worse than we thought. The tape begins with a voice log made by Ian Parker before the Alaskan disaster. In fact, the recording actually comes from all the way back in 1980, just after we received the response from Parallel World 1. Let's listen to the audio together.
I am afraid. Have we made a mistake? I've gone over the scenario in my head, over and over. What if the signal goes beyond what we know, far beyond our estimations, continually traveling the endless abyss, forever? We knew about the possibility of it happening. We took the necessary precautions. But still, it is a non-zero chance. We would be inviting things that could bend our reality. Things beyond our comprehension. A single reply. There's a reason only one world answered. The others, silent. They are hiding. They are afraid of what lies at the edge of the abyss. My God. What have we done?
Parker had some serious reservations about the signal, but he only expressed them after it was sent. Once it was already too late. The tape then immediately goes into a cognitohazard warning, alerting us that viewing the following footage will cause severe psychological damage. But this sign can't stop me because I can't read. After the warning, we get into another presentation that looks very similar to the one produced by Atom Labs in the Exclusion Zone safety tape. The presentation praises you for your mental resilience and congratulates you for being selected to test a revolutionary new technology. The technology they're referring to is a machine that will allow researchers to record footage of everything you perceive. That means they can record everything you see and everything you hallucinate. Reportedly, they want to be able to push this technology for widespread adoption, but it's relatively untested as of yet. By relatively untested, I actually mean completely untested, because this presentation was created to be viewed by the very first test subject for this machine. I already don't like where this is going, but don't worry, it's going to get worse. Use of the machine requires an operation. Nothing too major, they just want to crack open your skull and insert a device into your head. I mean, if they don't do this, how would they plug the machine into your brain, dummy? Besides, they've provided some tips to try to limit any lasting psychological damage. Tip number 1, isolate yourself. The last thing you want to do is get someone else wrapped up in all this, so do everyone a favor and make sure no one else gets hurt. Tip number 2, turn off the lights. Sitting in a well-lit room can make visual hallucinations more prevalent, more real. Obviously, we don't want that. You might get distracted from the task at hand. Stay focused. Don't pay them any mind. Tip number 3, wear headphones. That should help with any auditory hallucinations. Don't trust your ears. Tip number 4, control your fear. This will keep you alive. It's stronger when you're afraid. Finally, the presentation ends with a reminder of why you're here. You are the messenger. The questions are written in the notebook in front of you. Document all your observations and the answers you receive in this notebook. Our country and this company thanks you for your service. That last line, this company, that's gotta be Atom Labs, right? I mean, they're the ones who've been working with the government to fix this whole mess. After the conclusion of the presentation, the rest of the tape focuses entirely on a single piece of footage, the recording that was ripped from the back of our test subject's head. The footage begins with a short description. The farm. It was recorded in October of 1992, making this the latest video in the series so far. It continues. Footage contains first contact with... The entity resides in a computer video game called The Farm. Subject 294B is tasked with asking 5 pre-written questions. After that, the session starts, and the test subject begins to play the game. You probably already noticed, but of course, this is actually the game that was being advertised in the last tape. If this copy of the game has some sort of anomalous properties, I assume it's because a normal copy from our world got caught up in a fissure and replaced with one from the unknown. I almost wonder if this ties back into the clip we saw in tape 8, where someone playing video games captured footage of the explosion at Site Bravo out their window. Maybe they left a copy of The Farm at their home when they evacuated. Whatever, that's just speculation. It doesn't really change too much. As for the footage we're seeing of the game now, it seems pretty normal. The gameplay consists entirely of text-based operations and branching decisions. It's a little odd to me. I would have guessed that an anomalous video game from another world would be a little more, I don't know, anomalous. I guess there's the promise of some entity living inside the game, but honestly, that doesn't sit right with me either. For a moment, I want to return to a detail from Exclusion Zone Safety. Didn't Atom Labs explicitly warn against communicating with anomalous objects or entities? Now they're intentionally diving in, seeking information from the thing in the game. The whole operation sounds super risky, but wait, what just happened to the game? Throughout the video, the player's consciousness seems to get transported into the scenes described in the game, as if they're really living through the event playing out on the computer. This dark shot in front of the barn doors lingers for a bit, but when the game returns, the text lines up closely with what our test subject saw. The cutaway to the barn door is the first of several such transitions that you'll see through the episode, but there's also the matter of the captions that appear on screen. Finally, I have been waiting. I think that the thing living in the game is speaking to Subject 294B, but it's been waiting for him? How did it know he was coming? The test subject attempts to input another command. Open the barn doors. It doesn't work, so he tries again. Nothing. For 17 minutes, Subject 294B continually tried to open the doors. They describe feeling like they were physically standing in front of the barn, unable to resist the urge to go inside. Then there's some sort of system error, and it seems like a glitch where the game skips from the scene in front of the barn to the end of the day, right before bed. Just before the player is able to go to sleep, another message appears. "Do you hear that?" it asks. And then the game goes completely off the rails. The computer completely crashes in the middle of the test, and at the same time, Subject 294B begins having a massive seizure. Researchers successfully step in to stabilize their asset, but 294B becomes frantic at the notion of continuing to interact with the anomalous object. Researchers remind 294B that continuation with the test is a prerequisite for social integration, which is a fancy way of saying, if you don't finish the test, we won't let you leave. That gets the job done, and the test continues. "Do you hear that?" "Something is wrong," the game says to 294B. You notice something in the cornfield. Once again, the subject finds himself standing within the world of the game, this time holding a flashlight in front of a dark cornfield. The game then directs him to turn off the light, and it sounds like something comes out of the cornfield to meet him, the entity living in the game. "I know why you're here." The voice comes from beyond the cornfield, out in the darkness. "I warn you, the knowledge you seek will change nothing." Well, that's the closest 294B is going to get to an invitation. It's time for the messenger to ask his questions. Question 1. Where did you come from? Answer.
I'm from a world similar to yours. It was lost to the abyss. I heard the signal. I entered your world. I have been here ever since.
While the entity is saying this, we can see what appears to be the scene from Mythical Creatures, only now we're seeing it from outside the bedroom door. We watch the door slowly open, but then it all falls to black. Question 2. Are there more of you? Answer.
Yes. Many more. The others are weak.
Behind this answer, we see footage that looks to me like a man in a hazmat suit pointing to a bright light in the distance. My guess is that this footage is from inside the exclusion zone, of Atom Labs employees observing a fissure opening in the distance. In Exclusion Zone Safety, it did mention that fissures always emit a bright flash of light before they open, but I'll admit it's really hard to make out any details that would confirm this theory. Question 3. What is your purpose here? Answer.
I am observing my new home. You are not the first. You will continue the cycle before they arrive.
What? Who is that? 294B begins screaming. Maybe it was a mistake to send him back in. Researchers attempt to interrupt the session, but the game continues. The voice in the darkness continues.
You have forgotten. No one believes you. Your blood has been tainted by the abyss. I know your true value. You will play a game, a real game. If you win,
294B has no choice but to accept the challenge from the hidden thing in the computer. It seems simple enough. To an outside observer, the subject is simply playing the game normally. However, from 294B's perspective, he's fighting with his own hands against real monsters like the one in the cornfield. Throughout this section, he can be heard having a mental break. Amidst the screaming and labored breathing, he cries out, "I can't remember my name," before continuing to shoot at the enemies. On the game screen, some of the enemies appear to be strange, bulbous worms, big heaps of flesh with no discernible front or back, about the size of a dog. Other enemies look like animals, elk and bears, except that they all seem to be missing their faces. Where a snout would have been, instead there's just a gaping hole on the poor beasts' heads. The scene takes place in front of a farmhouse that, halfway through the conflict, splits in half to reveal what looks like two glowing eyeballs set in a skinned skull. I think this is supposed to be the entity in the game watching the battle unfold, but retro graphics aren't exactly the best at communicating realistic, detailed images. We watched the entire fight like this, watching pixels scramble around the screen trying to kill each other. I struggle to imagine what this must look like, must feel like, from 294B's perspective. The fear and anguish of being chased by otherworldly horrors while some massive, bleeding face peers at you from the darkness above. A real game, if ever there was one. 294B does pretty well, all things considered. He manages to last several minutes of the assault, but at no point is there an end in sight. Eventually, it's time for the game to come to a close. Without warning, a dozen faceless elk spill over from the sides of the screen, rush towards 294B, and the screen goes black. The voice in the darkness speaks to 294B once more, revealing the test subject's true name, Ian Parker. I think this means that at some point in the wake of the Great Alaskan Disaster, Atom Labs must have retrieved Ian Parker, and now they're using him as a test subject. What are you?
I am no longer human. I can take any form. I initiated the cycle. I created the first signal. You know who I
The final tape of Chapter 2 ends with Ian Parker screaming, begging for death. That would have been where things ended, but as I've been working on this video, Chilling Abyss dropped the first episode of Chapter 3 of Arcadia, paid programming. What gets me most excited about this episode is that it marks the return to something we haven't seen in a long time. Arcadia TV, the station that aired the anomalous broadcasts at the beginning of the series. The episode begins by showing us a TV guide from September 13th, year unknown. I think this episode must be the latest in the timeline, as evidenced by the fact that we're up to episode 27 of the Midnight Safety Guide, which covers an anomalous entity known as false dogs. We finally learn that Midnight Safety Guide is produced by an organization that we've never heard of before, the Anomalous Awareness Association, or for short. We can also see that the curfew enforced in Selawik, Alacaket, and Fort Yukon is now being extended into the rest of the state, more evidence that the exclusion zone is creeping down from the north. The rest of the footage alternates between a few cryptic monologues from an unknown origin and a home recording filmed in an Arcadia TV viewer's home. Let's go ahead and start with the found footage. The entire clip focuses on a dark corner of the resident's home. While he records, the Arcadia TV guide music can be heard from his television, just out of frame. After getting the camera set up, the resident begins to speak.
Yes, follow my orders. Use
Hello? I have a problem. There's something in my house. Every night it returns around the same time. I called the Anomalous Awareness Association, and they do not recognize this entity, and that you must vacate the area immediately. They told me to abandon my home. I can't do that. This is my home, and I'm not leaving it.
I'll bet that. They wasn't fooling when they said they was going to raid the dam.
You see this?
Hey, there's a couple more of them coming.
This is what I'm going to use to kill it.
The fact that this guy's dealing with an intrusive entity is bad enough, but the worst part is that he called the people who are supposed to have answers, and all they could tell him was to leave. That doesn't really seem like a solution. At least he's armed, I guess.
And tonight, we have a special news report regarding the recent rise in tensions between the United States and Canada. The Canadian Prime Minister last night made a televised speech discussing their anger with the United States and the multiple grievances they have with the U.S. At one point in the speech, the Canadian Prime Minister said, quote, "If the U.S. continues to ignore the issue and doesn't secure the borders of Alaska, we will have no choice but to defend our nation." The White House has yet to comment on the statements made.
Oh, shit!
The shot of the entity coming from the darkness is so gloriously drawn out. The way the creature hides in the static, only showing one hand and part of its torso, is just peak analog horror. Not to mention the sounds. Let's go ahead and get a look at the thing that was hiding in this man's home by isolating the frames where it's visible. Obviously, this doesn't immediately resemble anything we've seen in the series so far, so I think that this entity is something entirely new. That conclusion is backed up by the fact that the creature is unrecognized by the Anomalous Awareness Association, although we don't really know how complete their documentation is. I think the strongest conclusions that we can draw from this footage is that while the effort to understand the unknown is growing, the variety of new and terrifying entities outpaces our research dramatically. Beyond that, I'm not sure how much else we can learn from this man's death. However, like I said, that isn't the only footage included in this episode. There are also the monologues. I've spliced these segments into one clip, so let's go ahead and listen to it together.
The world is changing.
In a dark forest, we lit the fire. We are no longer alone. The abyss. It is spreading, consuming. Do not fight. Do not run. They are the endless. Your God will not protect you. They are outside, waiting. Do not resist. Let them in. They cannot be stopped. This is not your world anymore. You are no longer in control. Do you see it? It watches all of us. That is your God now. A real God. A true God. Are you afraid? Do not cry. Your gods never listened to you. They were never real.
The first question I have is, who is this? I mean, who's speaking in these clips? We are no longer alone almost sounds like someone from our world, but once the tape starts telling us not to fight, it starts to sound a lot more like the unknown speaker from Interference. My money is on the latter, if I'd have to pick. The last part of the monologue, the one focused on the dot next to the moon, is by far the most concerning and confusing element of this footage. I'll admit I have no idea what the voice means when it refers to this distant speck as a god. I think this is probably related to the ambiguous religious references that have appeared in a few of the video descriptions, starting with exclusion zone safety, but I don't know how yet. I didn't expect the blip by the moon to be a sentient being, and honestly, I still don't know if it's sentient or if this unknown speaker is just speaking in metaphors. Those are conclusions that I think we're going to have to draw once more tapes have been uncovered, so I probably won't touch on this too much in my analysis. Finally, there's one more segment to the episode. Another piece of children's programming featuring this little Muppet character standing in front of a stylized picture of the distant lunar deity. The character is reading letters submitted by viewers, the first of which asks, "Do you believe in God?" Before this little critter can answer, there's a knock at the door. "We seem to have a visitor," the character says. "Come on in." The door is unlocked. And so, the latest episode of Arcadia ends very fittingly with an open door. Part of what makes Arcadia so hard to analyze is the order in which it's told, so let's try to look at everything in order. My timeline is shaped by a couple of assumptions. I'm taking for granted that all the footage we've seen exists within the universe where John Walker and Atom Labs sent out the signal, our universe. Either because the footage was produced here originally, or in the case of one particular piece of footage, because it traveled here through a fissure. Because Arcadia deals with nearly identical parallel worlds, it's plausible that some episodes take place in other realities. But even if that's possible, I don't think it's what's happening. I think we can trust that we're at the center of the narrative, because at the end of the day, Arcadia is a story about doors. Our doors. Additionally, I believe that before the disaster at Station Bravo, nothing spooky was going on in our universe. No monsters, no anomalous objects, and no fissures. Any tape that includes one of these elements has to have been recorded or produced after 1983. So, with all of that in mind, I'm confident that the series starts with the earliest events of the signal in 1980, when John Walker finally finished developing Eve. On February 3rd, the first signal was sent out and contact was established with Parallel World 1. Ian Parker's audio log from the farm shows us that not everyone was optimistic about the results of the experiment. Instead of feeling hopeful about the opportunity to collaborate with another world, Parker was afraid that they had underestimated the range of Walker's signal, and afraid of who it might reach. If we aren't alone, if there are other worlds out there, where is everybody? Parker's concerns came too late. The signal had already been broadcast, and Walker was enthusiastically developing a new machine to breach the abyss. The next major event came on November 26, 1981, when the inhabitants of Parallel World 2 decided to contact us. Other worlds had received the signal. They had only been hiding. One look inside Parallel World 2 proved Parker was right to be afraid. Even Dr. Walker, so committed to the pursuit of progress, would never open the door for that, at least not intentionally. December 23, 1983, the day of the Great North Alaskan disaster, was undoubtedly the busiest day of the entire series. A giant fissure opened at Research Station Bravo, destroying the facility and creating a permanent entrance into our world. To our knowledge, there was only one survivor, Ian Parker. He immediately placed a distress call, but there was very little anyone could do. Based on the last tape, we know that Parker managed to survive the ensuing chaos until he was retrieved by Atom Labs. Following the blast, the government came up with a story about a nuclear meltdown in the north, something believable that would get people out of their homes quickly. People would be skeptical of the truth, so a lie would have to be enough to sell the evacuation. They gave people 72 hours, and after 5 a.m. on December 28th, the war with the North began. During this time, other worlds began to interfere with our technology, hijacking our broadcasts to deliver messages like the one we saw in Interference. For whatever reason, these worlds came to tell us of our impending doom, but they don't seem to be actively participating in it or causing our demise. Instead, they say, "We won't interfere with what is coming, and we will watch you suffer." They hate us, but they aren't going to destroy us. Our execution will come at the hands of another, but who or what remains to be seen. In 1984, a massive number of animals begin to migrate from North Alaska, though it isn't really clear what importance that holds in the narrative yet. I do think that, based on later episodes like The Farm, the animals in Arcadia have some hidden relevance that hasn't been revealed yet. After this, the order of things becomes a lot less clear. Very few tapes in Arcadia are actually dated, and placing them on a timeline is extremely difficult, but here's how I see it. After the evacuation from the north, it became gradually more necessary to inform the public of the truth. Even if we don't have solid dates, I believe that tapes which speak openly about the supernatural for a public audience tend to come later than tapes which attempt to cover up the truth. For example, Mythical Creatures comes much later in the series than Deep Sea Live. In Deep Sea Live and Arcadia Apology, the accidental broadcast of some anomalous entity was cause for an apology and even a cover-up. That isn't the response from a TV station that regularly airs the Midnight Safety Guide. From 83 to 89, fissures began appearing more frequently, video interference from other worlds became the norm, and the chance of a run-in with an anomalous entity or object only rose. Sooner or later, the public would learn that something was wrong. It was only a matter of survival when they came face to face with the unknown. That's what we see in the footage from tapes like Deep Sea Live, Mythical Creatures, and The Crying Cave. Encounters with the unknown. Deep Sea Live is the earliest recorded encounter with an anomalous entity, the glowing-eyed thing from the pit. We don't have a name for this creature like we do for mythical creatures, unless this is a Night Stalker as mentioned in episode 3 of the Midnight Safety Guide. I think Mythical Creatures takes place later in the timeline, potentially after 1990. Mythical Creatures is episode 4 of Midnight Safety Guide, but our footage of episode 3 comes from Welcome to Paradise, right after the distorted news report about the hole burrowed under the northern wall. If the wall was built in 1990, and if the clips in Welcome to Paradise all aired around the same time, then Mythical Creatures would have to have premiered sometime after 1990. That said, with the glitches affecting footage in Arcadia, I'm not confident about this tape's placement on the timeline. Maybe we'll get more answers in the future, but that's where I'm putting it for now. As for the Crying Cave, well, this one's actually pretty interesting. See, one thing never sat right with me about the initial set of anomalous broadcasts, and now I think I know why. As I understand it, most of what we've seen in Arcadia isn't actually paranormal. Instead, anything paranormal that we've seen is 100% normal for some other parallel version of our world. Out in the unknown beyond the abyss, there's some world where mythical creatures aren't mythical at all. They're just creatures. But the fissures, that's a hell we made by poking holes through the abyss. Those aren't normal in any world. According to Atom Labs, there are 4 stable fissures located across Alaska. One of them is at Station Bravo, and 3, well, we don't know where the other 3 are located. We don't even know what a stable fissure really is either. Is it a portal? Maybe just like a bubble of bending light? Is it even visible to begin with? I don't think it's any of these things. Look, I've been going back over one of the later tapes again and again, Exclusion Zone Safety, and I've realized that this tape has one last gift for us. I think it shuts the door on the longest running question in the series so far. What is the pit? All the way back in Deep Sea Live, we learned about the pit, a seemingly bottomless hole on the ocean floor. Later on, in the Crying Cave, we see an almost identical pit deep within a cave in the Alaskan wilderness. In both of these tapes, the glowing-eyed monster kind of steals the show, but don't you think it's weird? I mean, the pit feels entirely disconnected from everything in the series so far. Even once we learned about the signal, the Alaskan disaster, and all the anomalous entities threatening humanity, it felt like there was no explanation for these massive, endless chasms. For my money, the best explanation of both of these formations is that they're stable fissures, and I think I can prove it, too. All I need is that weird hidden note from the incident report in Exclusion Zone Safety. Small traces of blank found in Father's system, similar to John Doe in 88. Throughout the entire series so far, there's only been one other tape that has mentioned 1988, and wouldn't you know it, it just so happens to be the only tape with an unnamed dead man in it. I think the body that fell from the sky in the Crying Cave was another anomalous entity, only this entity was basically a normal human, not some monster. The world that he was from was almost identical to ours. Almost. That's why the missing people on the poster either weren't missing or didn't exist. It wasn't a prank. In John Doe's world, those kids really did go missing after entering the cave. They were probably killed by the creature in the cave, a fate very nearly shared by our cameraman, except he found something else. A giant hole in the ground, a fissure, an open door, and he stepped through. As he tumbled through the abyss, something clung to him, changed him. Like some small piece of the endless darkness stuck to his soul, contaminating his very essence. According to the incident report, after Ethan Marshall was battered and broken by the blast from a fissure, they found some substance in his system. It was the same substance they'd found in the John Doe in '88, the cameraman who fell out of the sky. And I think they found the exact same substance in Ian Parker. Your blood has been tainted by the abyss. I know your true value. That's what the entity living in the farm told Parker, and it seemed to know a lot more than we do. There's something festering in the abyss, the space between universes. It infects and tarnishes anyone who comes into contact with it, changes them in some immeasurable way. The entity said that Parker still has a role to play, and I'm guessing that Marshall does too whenever he recovers. I think that the John Doe from the Crying Cave would have too if he weren't, I think they have some special value to the host of hateful doppelgangers ravaging North Alaska, but right now, we don't know why the infected are important, so we'll just have to wait for more answers. A lot happened in the Dark Age between 1983 and 1988, but the discovery of the body at the Crying Cave marks the start of new information coming to light. In Exclusion Zone Safety, we saw the increase in fissure frequency between 1987 and 1989, which came to a head with the fissure in Alacaket in the fall of '89. I think that's when it became absolutely necessary to start educating the public through programming such as the Midnight Safety Guide and the Great North Alaskan Disaster documentary in 1990. With how rapidly the fissures multiplied, I can only imagine how bad things were by the time the 90s rolled around. I think this was around the time that the tunnels were discovered under the wall, and it was when Atom Labs started to get really desperate enough to start searching for answers from anomalous entities. Desperate enough to dive into the unknown. Until now, I've downplayed the significance of the being hiding in the farm as just another anomalous entity, an ordinary evil in the midst of a vast, vile sea. But I believe that it is the key to understanding the future of Arcadia. Ian Parker's conversation with the entity leaves me with many questions, but I can only answer a few of them. What is Ian Parker's role in the future of Arcadia? What is the entity living in the farm? What is the cycle? Some of this will get pretty speculative, but getting speculative is the fun part after all. So let's tackle the first question. What part is Parker meant to play? I think Parker's role in the story to come is related to what we've already seen him doing so far, interacting with anomalies. Parker may have gone into the farm as Subject 294B, but Atom Labs knew who they were sending into the game. They didn't use some death row inmate to deliver their message and ask their questions. They specifically sent their most valuable witness, someone who was by no means expendable. Atom Labs might have tried to send others into the game and failed, or maybe they already knew that it could only ever have been Parker. It must have had something to do with what the entity said about Parker's blood and how it had been tainted by the abyss. Could it be that people who've been touched by the darkness between worlds are uniquely capable of interacting with anomalous objects and communicating with the unknown? If so, does that mean that Ethan Marshall is another candidate for Atom Labs experiments? I think so. I'm not certain, but I could totally see Ian Parker and Ethan Marshall being the protagonists of this series going forward. The one who knew more than most but failed to stop it, and the one whose daughter was eaten by the unknown. So, if Parker and Marshall are our protagonists, what does that make the entity on the farm? The antagonist? I don't think so. Reading over the being's answers to Parker's questions, it honestly doesn't seem hostile, at least not outwardly. It's like the face in the static in Interference, a herald of things to come, not the architect of our destruction. In some ways, it's a kindred spirit, a being from a world that was once similar to ours before it was lost to the abyss, a being that lost its humanity, a being that sent out a signal. That's the line that, to me, gives the greatest hint to this being's identity, because we also know someone who sent out a signal, Dr. John Walker. So wait, was John Walker somehow imprinted onto this game? Others have theorized that the events at Ground Zero somehow changed Walker, stripping away his humanity and leaving him as this formless, floating thing that can attach itself to technology. But I think there are some issues with that theory. Don't get me wrong, I agree that this is probably John Walker. He's the one who sent the signal. But while this anomalous entity might be Dr. Walker, it certainly isn't our Dr. Walker. Stick with me for a second. Walker knew a lot about the unknown, probably more than anyone else in our universe. But he was absolutely clueless as to the ultimate effect of his research at Station Bravo. Compared to the strange worlds that now haunt us, even our most educated minds are children, curiously plunging their fingers into the flames. Walker was ambitious, but he wouldn't have sent out the signal if he'd known how hot that flame burns. The entity on the farm is something wiser, older. This is a version of John Walker that didn't just send a signal. It sent the first signal. It's a version of John Walker who, by the time we sent a signal of our own, was already twisted enough to be able to hear it and to invade our world, all to what? Honestly, this primordial being's motivation isn't very clear, but I think it has something to do with the cycle that he kept mentioning. I initiated the cycle. You will continue the cycle. The message delivered to us in Interference may have been a death sentence, but this cycle, it's a curse. A curse that threatens to erase our humanity and swallow up our world, maybe every world. Walker sees his past in our future, but we can't seem to stop marching forward. Throughout the entire series, one thing has been abundantly clear. We know less than everyone else. We are children. We're naive and desperate for companionship. We're also deeply curious, but as cats are so keenly aware, curiosity kills. Have you ever heard of the Fermi paradox? It's based on a question that has haunted physicists, astronomers, and science fiction authors alike for the last 100 years or so. Where is everybody? Isn't it weird that the best evidence we have that we aren't alone in the universe is us? We have no concrete proof that there's anyone else out there among the stars, but in this unfathomably large universe, it seems so prideful to assume that we're the best there's ever been. The smartest, the most civilized, the most technologically advanced, the most powerful. No matter what metric, it's unlikely that we're in first place, but we seem to be standing on the podium all alone. There are many possible explanations for the Fermi paradox, but one seems particularly relevant to the narrative of Arcadia, the Dark Forest hypothesis. This explanation posits that there are advanced civilizations all around us, cloaked in darkness and poised to kill, like a giant game of Battleship. The civilizations that last are the ones that keep their pieces hidden, or better yet, the ones no one knows are even playing. If you announce your location to the enemy, well, your battleship gets sunk. It's natural selection at a galactic scale, or, in the case of Arcadia, a multiversal scale. John Walker made a machine that could send a signal that could ask the question, where is everybody? But in doing so, he also shot off a flare to our local cluster of universes, making our position known in a forest full of predators.
In a dark forest, we lit the fire
he told the enemy where all of our pieces were, and if Ian Parker was right, that signal never stopped. It continues to travel the abyss, constantly reaching increasingly distorted and hostile worlds that can distort our very reality. We made ourselves known to a multiverse full of hate, a multiverse that knew better, a multiverse that was afraid. But afraid of what exactly? I think they're afraid of the cycle. According to Walker, there are others like him, and they're on their way to our universe. They're weak, but they are many. Does this mean other versions of John Walker? Possibly. However, I think it's more likely that he's referring to others who've lost their worlds, their humanity. Therein lies what I believe the true nature of the cycle to be. I think it's some sort of process that will cause us to lose all connection to what it fundamentally means to be human. The others hate us because we are what they once were, before they knew the truth, before they continued the cycle, before they were afraid. The worlds of the multiverse don't fear each other. They fear what's between, the abyss, the space between worlds, the space that consumes worlds, the space that twists and splits and reassembles you into something different, something inhuman, something unknown. We're already starting to see this change. Ian Parker, Ethan Marshall, and John Doe, abyss-touched individuals who've been tainted by their time within the darkness. The fissures will become more frequent. The exclusion zone will continue to grow. Our doors will open wider, and one day there will be none. No, not one, who is untouched by the darkness. On that day, we will look back with bitterness because of what we've lost, growing to despise any world that still has enough humanity to ask, where is everybody? We will show them why we are afraid. We will break down their doors. We will watch them grow inhuman and hateful. We will watch them suffer. I'm Mudgeon. Thanks for watching.